Well, hello again, everyone. This is Merideth Nagel coming at you with your latest edition of Homeschool for Realtors. And today, well, actually, I'm excited every time, aren't I? Today, I'm particularly excited because we have new standard contracts coming out effective November 1st. And today, we're going to talk about the changes in the as-is FARBAR contract. Now, before we get started, I just want to point out, in case you don't know, those contracts are called FARBAR contracts because a committee of members of the Florida Association of Realtors and attorneys all get together and periodically update and change these contracts to match the changing times and to fix problems that we've had in prior editions. So the FARBAR group has gotten together, they have produced and agreed on these changes, and they will be effective on the new forms effect November 1st. So I'm not going to talk about every single little change because some of them really are not going to make any difference to you guys. What we're going to talk about today are the things that I believe will impact your day-to-day practice of real estate. So we're going to start at the top. First of all, your section of the contract that includes the fixtures that convey or go along with the property when it's sold, they have added to make clear some items which I'm glad to hear about because they have caused some last minute closing problems and may have for you as well. So it's now clear that television mounts, thermostats, doorbells, and those things can be expensive, as you know, especially some of our wireless and smart doorbells and thermostats. Those are all going to convey now. Unless they're scratched through. So there's no going to be arguing at the end of the day that they took the $150 thermostat with them. It's got to stay unless it's written through. Same thing with mailbox keys. It can be very expensive, some of you know, to get new mailbox keys in a community if the buyer doesn't have them. So again, it's got to be clear. If your seller doesn't have a mailbox key for some reason, scratch that out, or else they're going to have to produce one if they've lost one. Next, we have some changes to the financing contingency. Now, I will tell you guys that even as a lawyer who writes and reads confusing stuff for a living, I think that the financing contingency could have used a little tightening up, and I'm glad to say we finally have that. So let's talk about those changes. The first and most significant is that the loan approval period, that 30 days from effective date, unless another date is given, that loan approval period is still the same, and during that time, the buyer has to use good faith and diligent efforts to get his loan approved, but also within that time, the appraisal has to be done. This is a significant difference because remember, your buyer can cancel only at the closing table or sometime prior to closing. They can cancel and get their deposit back only if it was a appraisal or other property related condition at the end. Well, now that's built into the loan approval period. So if a buyer doesn't obtain the appraisal within that loan approval 30 days, and if it turns out at the end that he cannot close because the appraisal comes in too low, then the buyer will lose a deposit. So if you represent buyers, pay attention to this and make sure you're providing the lender enough time to not only get the actual buyer approved, but also the property conditions approved through appraisal. So that's a big change, and I want to see that you guys are paying attention to that. Hopefully that'll make a little bit of clearing up and make things easier. Unfortunately, it's going to be hard to get an appraisal within 30 days, and that's something that I think that people have typically been delaying. But no more. Those are going to have to be done within the 30-day loan approval period. And then the rules are the same. If the buyer has not been able to obtain loan approval, including the appraisal within the time provided, the buyer can cancel the contract. But if they don't cancel the contract and move forward and it later doesn't appraise, they have forfeited the deposit. And so that change has been a good one, and I think will make some clarity. Next, again, going along with the financing contingency changes, the new contract makes clear that all of the lender's fees must also be paid. Now, not all of them, like the origination fee, but all of the fees related to obtaining loan approval, which are the application fees, the credit fees, and then of course you got it, the appraisal fee, because that has to be done now within the 30 days, the appraisal. All right, so next we have the FERPTA changes. We now know that FERPTA charges need to be paid by the seller. And when I'm talking about FERPTA charges, what I mean is when you come to the time when your seller needs to obtain a withholding certificate or pay escrow fees associated with FERPTA withholding, or any paying for a CPA to review it, any fees that the closing agent might charge in addition, all of those fees are to be borne by the seller. Now, that had been a standard practice, although there was some arguments and disagreements on different files. So the changes make clear now that all the FERPTA charges are to be paid for by the seller. Next, we have the survey. Now, this is another one that concerns me. Used to be that you could get your survey right up to the day of closing, and if there was a problem on the survey at closing, you could cancel the contract. Now, however, that survey, if you want to cancel for a survey reason, you have to have it provided within 5 days prior to closing. This is a big deal, y'all, because you know what it's like right now trying to get surveys. Everybody's backed up. So again, we need to be setting a realistic expectation for closing date, knowing that the buyer, if the buyer wants to look at that survey and make sure that it's all okay, that survey will have to be done and completed 5 days prior to contract. So no more can a last minute, so to speak, survey problem give you a cancellation of your contract or a delay of your closing. Next, we have collection of fees at closing. I am so glad that the contract has clarified what has become a very hot issue within the past year or so, and that is, when can a seller release keys to their property to the buyer? Now, some sellers have been taking the position that they will not give over keys or consider the deal closed until they, the seller, receive the wire of the proceeds. So in other words, until the money is in their account, the seller's account. Some sellers have taken the position that they do not have to turn over keys and the deal is not closed. Now, that's never been the law, but what the new contract has done is made that clearer. So what it says is, once the closing agent has the money, the deal is closed. Not when the seller receives the money, when the closing agent receives the money. Now, again, that's always been the law, but the contract makes that clear, and it will help you now explain that to your sellers who are saying, wait a minute, I didn't get my money. It's not closed. If the closing agent has the money, then the deal is closed. And that's because the closing agent, of course, has a legal obligation to give that money to the seller. So the next change that we have coming up is the force majeure clause. Now, remember, if you watch these videos with regularity, we had a whole video discussing what a force majeure clause is. And if you haven't seen that video, I encourage you to go back and look at it. What the new contract has added are certain terms that will qualify as an act of God that allows the contract to either be canceled or extended. It's always been for things like hurricanes and storms, but now, based on our recent experience, we have added certain conditions like a government mandated shutdown, pandemics, epidemics, and issues of civil unrest, which by which they mean riots and such that make it impossible. Now, we don't have many of those in Lake County, thank goodness, but this has, of course, been a larger issue in some of our larger metropolitan areas. So probably most relevant to us, it just makes clear that any kind of a government shutdown will kick in with that force majeure clause. Now, I am hoping, and I know that you guys are, that we're never going to need to use these clauses again. We've all been through a terrible time, and I do want to take this opportunity for those of you who have suffered through COVID or had a family member suffer through. I don't want to make light of any of that. It's been a hard time for all of us, but the contract now at least addresses that issue. If you have any questions about this or any other issue related to real estate, please know, as I tell you each time, feel free to call me. I will answer any question you have, whether you close with me or not. I would be very glad to help you. I just want you to have a successful career and be able to help your clients as much as you can. We can be reached at 352-394-7408. Thank you very much for your time, and good luck with the new contract.